If you wandered through London in January 2009, you would have seen a bunch of double-decker buses rolling around with one of these signs. There is probably no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. This was the so-called atheist bus campaign, conceived by the comedian Ariane Shireen, with the support of famed atheist activist Richard Dawkins. This campaign came during the height of the New Atheist movement. In quick succession, atheist writers like Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, and Ayaan Hirsi Ali had all published best-selling books critical of religion. They were staging debates against prominent Christian apologists, organizing large-scale conferences and rallies such as the 2012 Reason Rally in Washington, D.C. All of this propelled atheism into the mainstream spotlight, and for many, established a stereotypical understanding of what atheism is. You may have seen terms thrown around online like angry atheist or evangelical atheist, terms that equate atheism with in-your-face religion-critical activism like this. But is this an accurate understanding of atheism? Wherever someone is talking about religion, there's a scholar of religion behind the scenes collecting what is said and done as data, and over the past decade, non-religion has become a growing topic within the field of religious studies, or should I say, non-religious studies. So what is atheism? How should we define it? And what does it mean when someone calls themselves an atheist? Defining atheism seems like an easy, straightforward process. Just break down the word. It comes from the Greek theos, meaning God. Adding that a at the beginning of the word negates its meaning, turning God into without God or lack of God. So atheism is often defined as an absence of belief in the existence of a god or gods. Sometimes this is understood in a negative or positive sense or a strong and weak sense. Negative atheism could refer to people who have never encountered religious ideas before or simply never think about questions of God. Positive atheism, on the other hand, indicates some level of conviction or certainty, meaning that this type of atheist actively refutes the idea of God. But already you might notice that our seemingly simple definition is starting to expand, and it gets very complicated very quickly. Let's consider the word again. Atheism, without God. It's a term that can exist only in relation to another concept, God. God concepts are widespread in the world's religions. In fact, they're probably one of the most widespread concepts you'll find in the whole history of religion. But God concepts are not universal, nor are they necessarily central to all forms of religiosity. The sociologist Jerome Baggett asks, well, what about religions that are more concerned about ambiguous nature spirits, or the spirits of the ancestors? What about supernatural forces like mana in some Polynesian cultures, or qi in Chinese religions? Does atheism necessitate an absence of belief in these as well? For many atheists, the answer is yes, of course. Atheism often goes hand in hand with philosophical naturalism, or an understanding that the universe only operates on this worldly natural laws. So atheism in this sense not only refers to a lack of belief in God, but also a lack of belief in the whole buffet of supernatural agents or phenomena that we encounter in religion. And some atheist activists like to point out that even theists are technically selectively atheistic, lacking belief in the rest of the world's pantheons. A Christian is technically atheistic about Vishnu or Quetzalcoatl. But atheism gets even more complicated because people are not consistent. For example, there are Christians who believe in reincarnation, which historic Christian orthodoxy has never taught. In other words, religion as it's practiced on the ground often doesn't match official definitions. And sure enough, when sociologists interview atheists, they find a lot of complexity, diversity, and contradiction. A recent study conducted on atheism around the world found that most people who self-identify as atheist also claim to believe in at least one supernatural phenomenon, such as ghosts or karma. In the United States, only 35% of self-identified atheists are philosophical naturalists. This is especially true in countries that are considered to be majority atheists, such as China or Japan, where religion looks very different on the ground compared to Western religions. According to that same study, only 8% of self-described atheists in China are philosophical naturalists. So consider a Chinese person who calls themselves an atheist but believes in qi and lights incense for their ancestors. Are they an atheist, or are they like a vegan who eats meat? And if we say they are not atheist, does this mean we are changing the definition of atheism to avoid confronting inconvenient evidence? To quote the scholar of non-religion, Jonathan Landman. Moreover, a lot of people who say they don't believe in a god don't identify as atheists. Some may call themselves nothing in particular. Some of the staunchest atheists out there say they are technically agnostic, meaning that they can't say for sure that God doesn't exist. Still others might refer to themselves as spiritual but not religious, meaning that they lack a belief in God, but at the same time, they engage in other kinds of meaningful beliefs and practices that they consider spiritual. People's belief about the existence or non-existence of a God doesn't always map perfectly onto how they self-identify. As we'll explore in the next section, this means that there are a lot of technical atheists out there who might never show up on a sociological survey because they don't claim the name for themselves. It gets even more complex when we consider what we mean when we talk about belief in the first place. If someone checks the "I believe in God" box on a survey, but they never think about God or never act as though God exists, are they technically a negative atheist, oblivious to their own atheism? And when theists have a dark night of the soul and doubt the existence of God, do they temporarily become an atheist until their conviction returns? The fact that atheism is inextricably tied to a cognitive process, believing in a proposition, highlights how ambiguous atheism can be, considering the contradictory and fluid nature of human thought. So all this to say, defining atheism as the absence of belief in a god or gods has some use. Scholars do use this definition in their research all the time, but clearly atheism means different things to different people and takes different forms on the ground. Whether it's the ironic activism of Pastafarianism or the Satanic Temple, the philosophical naturalism of so-called new atheists like Richard Dawkins, or the Chinese atheist who still turns out for the annual ghost festival to appease the hungry ghosts. Scholars these days who study unbelief try to be more precise with their terminology. For example, scholars use the term non-theism to refer specifically to not believing in God. Non-theism doesn't necessarily exclude believing in other supernatural agents and forces. They'll use terms like metaphysical naturalism or philosophical naturalism to refer specifically to non-belief in any supernatural phenomena. A study published back in 2019 identified 3 types of atheism. First, spiritual atheists, people who don't believe in God but have high rates of belief in other supernatural phenomena, less negative opinions about religion, and less certainty about their belief. Then there are analytical atheists, people who also don't believe in God but are much more confident about their views with much more negative opinions about religion. And what the scholars call uncertain non-believers. Again, non-believers in God but much more ambivalent about their opinions. All this to say, atheism is one example of the many varieties of non-religious experience. Like the term atheism, non-religion can only exist in relation to another concept. Religion, itself a famously difficult term to define. The scholar of religion Lois Lee defines non-religion as indicating anything which is primarily defined by a relationship of difference to religion. It doesn't encompass everything that is not religion, but rather, non-religion encompasses whatever is understood to be religious in any specific case. Scholars generally use non-religion as a big umbrella term, encompassing a whole bunch of overlapping and interrelated concepts that get their meaning in relation to religion, including atheism, but also agnosticism, anti-theism, apatheism, humanism, secularism, irreligion, unbelief, and more. Just as religions are always internally diverse, non-religion is too. Time to add even more complexity. Bubbling under the surface of this whole discussion, you might have noticed a distinction between atheism as a definition and atheism in practice. In other words, atheism as a word describing a type of non-belief, and atheism as an identity or worldview, like other isms. Buddhism encompasses way more than just a set of beliefs. It can also refer to a way of life and practice. Veganism extends way beyond dietary choices to a comprehensive set of ethics. So atheism too can be seen as shaping one's entire approach to understanding the world and living within it. It's not just the denial of a god. Atheism can be a public identity. It can be a communal identity, with atheists gathering at conferences or Sunday morning services, or being part of a YouTuber's online community, brought together by a shared secular worldview. So to answer the question, what is atheism, we also need to consider what it means when atheism refers to an identity and a worldview. As an example, let's consider probably the most famous forms of atheism in practice, the so-called new atheism that we started with. Just to get this out of the way, no one really likes this term, new atheism. Sam Harris, one of the so-called 4 horsemen of new atheism, just considers it a publishing phenomenon, when 4 atheist authors, including himself, published religion-critical books in the early 2000s. Scholars have tried to make sense of this term as well, variously referring to new atheism as a cultural phenomenon or a political movement characterized by secular activism. The researcher Thomas Zank writes, there is simply no manifesto of new atheism, and there is no all-embracing organization in which all, or even most, of the so-labeled persons are united. But other scholars like Christopher Cotter and Ryan Cragen have argued that we can use New Atheism as an admittedly clumsy term to categorize a distinct secular worldview and social group. Dr. Cotter defines New Atheism as a naturalistic worldview with a strong emphasis on reason and science as the best means of understanding reality, in contrast to religious claims regarding revealed truths. This worldview is also characterized by moral judgments of the immorality of religion and religious institutions, and an emphasis on raising the profile of atheism in public life and atheistic identities. Dr. Cragen estimated that as of 2015, somewhere around 13 to 16 million American atheists fit these three criteria: a naturalistic worldview, an emphasis on science and reason to understand the universe, and a somewhat critical stance, if not stridently critical stance, against religion. The emphasis on raising the profile of atheism and atheistic identities is a key aspect of defining atheism as a social identity and secular worldview, which brings us to the concept of organized atheism. Within the last few decades, researchers have found that individuals have started to build communities around non-religious identities. In the US in particular, there are growing numbers of atheistic congregations who borrow the ritual format of Christian services, such as Houston Oasis in Texas and Sunday Assembly. We've seen this among transhumanists as well. Transhumanism is a project that seeks to transcend human physical and mental limitations through technology, and it often takes an atheistic philosophical materialism as its underlying framework. Transhumanists have, in fact, formed a church based in Florida called the Church of Perpetual Life. This church refers to itself as a science-based church and is focused on the goal of age reversal, and it hosts gatherings that include music, food, and presentations by scientists and health experts. Researchers consistently find that organized non-religion is about building communities of like-minded people, but also about advocating for a set of political policies. Activist groups like American Atheists, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and others work to build community among people who identify as atheists, as well as other non-religious people, but they also work to advocate for political issues like the separation of church and state. So for many atheists, atheism encompasses way more than a simple belief or disbelief in deities. Like other isms, atheism refers to a more comprehensive worldview that influences and shapes how they interact with and interpret the world. However, researchers have found that people who publicly identify as atheists are more likely to fit certain social demographics. In a 2016 paper, the sociologist Evan Stewart used survey data to compare people who adopt the atheist label and those who say they don't believe in a god, but don't call themselves atheists. He called this a comparison between atheists and atheistic people. Dr. Stewart found that people who self-identified as atheist, people who publicly use the label for themselves, were significantly more likely to be young, male, white, middle class, have a university education, and be politically progressive, when compared to the group that he called atheistic people. This tells us something interesting about atheism as a secular worldview and social identity. This means that there are many, many tens of thousands of people around the world who are atheistic but don't call themselves atheists. This is partially because atheists have been morally stigmatized for hundreds of years, and prejudice against atheists is still going strong in American culture. In a 2006 paper published in American Sociological Review, the researchers found that Americans rated atheists as less likely to share their vision of society, and said they were less likely to approve of their child marrying an atheist than any other racial or religious minority group. They replicated these findings in 2016 in another paper, finding that rates of anti-atheist sentiment hadn't really changed over the course of a decade. So there are people out there who reject the existence of a god or gods, and are therefore technically positive atheists, but they feel social pressure not to label themselves outright. Researchers call this social desirability bias. This happens when people tell survey researchers answers that they think the sociologists want to hear, instead of answers that are more accurate, either because they don't want to face stigma or because they want to present themselves in a certain light. Social desirability bias may be why self-identified atheists are more likely to be white, male, and educated, because it may be easier for them to publicly adopt a stigmatized identity compared to someone from a more marginalized community. For example, there are heavy taboos around black atheism in the US, women being atheists nearly everywhere in the world, and atheism among indigenous groups that are encouraged to identify with traditional spiritualities.
Do you know an American Indian atheist?
Many non-white atheists feel they need to conceal their non-belief due to social stigma. When it comes to gender, the scholar Lee Eric Schmid argues that historically, women in the US have been associated with an ideal of pious femininity. By this, she means society expects women to be pious and expects them to go to church, and so a woman being an atheist is particularly scandalous. Other scholars such as Katja Gunther have found that women are much less likely to identify with the new atheist movement because they perceive it as an unwelcoming culture to women. So atheism can mean a lot of things to different people. At its most basic etymological level, atheism is the absence of belief in God. For many, this extends to the absence of belief in any supernatural agents or phenomena, from fairies to demons to karma or chi. But as the scholar of non-religion Nicholas Conrad argues, focusing on atheism only as a type of non-belief sets up a false dichotomy that excludes the middle. One is a believer or not a believer. If you only look for those who call themselves atheists, this leaves out a vast number of people who closely fit the description of atheist, but never take the name. So while new atheists like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins often epitomize the stereotype of an atheist, we may be entering a period of fragmenting and proliferating varieties of non-religion, involving varying degrees of self-awareness, social coherence as an identifiable social group, and varying levels of opposition to religion, some more critical than others. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. This was episode 1 in a 10-episode series on atheism. I'll be releasing an episode every month or so on all sorts of topics. What are the causes of atheism? Is Buddhism atheistic? What was atheism like in the USSR? We really cover a broad spectrum of topics. It was made possible through the support of a grant from the John Templeton Foundation managed by the Queen's University of Belfast. Queen's University Belfast is home to an incredible program called Explaining Atheism, which brings together researchers to advance both the academic and public understanding of the origins and possible futures of non-belief around the world. You really should check out their website and especially check out their background reading page, which lists a whole bunch of scholarship on non-religion and unbelief. So back in January, it was an unsettled time for YouTubers. A lot of big-name YouTubers announced that they were stepping back from their channels to take a break. But at the time, I felt this overwhelming urge to double down on religion for breakfast. My mission here to boost everyone's religious literacy is not over. In fact, I think it's more important than ever. So now that we're over halfway through the year, I just wanted to give a quick update because I'm super proud of the work we've done so far. We've continued the long-running Chinese religion series with an episode on the goddess Madzu. I've started to roll out Hinduism videos with an episode on avatars, and there are more Hinduism videos in the pipeline, so stay tuned for that. And we had a massive hit with the video, What is the Kaaba?, which rocketed to over 1 million views in just a few weeks. It's now one of the top performing videos on the entire channel. And I love that because this video in particular is a great example of evergreen religious literacy content. It will show up in search results for years to come and will hopefully be a resource for students, teachers, and journalists. Publishing content on YouTube is a roller coaster of highs and lows. Some videos do really well, like What is the Kaaba, while others don't, despite the same level of effort and passion and resources that I put into each and every video. A great example of this is our back-to-back Buddhism episodes back in May, when I published an episode on Greco-Buddhism and then a week later, one on Vesak, arguably the most important Buddhist holiday. Greco-Buddhism was a viral hit at over 600,000 views, while Vesak only got 70,000 views. But from a purely educational angle, the Vesak video is more important for religious literacy. Greco-Buddhism is a really cool topic, but it's a niche topic for those interested in history. But I want a high school teacher to know what Vesak is, just in case they have Buddhist students in their classroom. Too many underperforming videos in a row can threaten the viability of this channel, and just speaking personally, it is super stressful for me. That's why your support on Patreon is so absolutely vital. By supporting me on Patreon, you provide a revenue floor for this channel. You help to level out those peaks and troughs and ensure that I can continue to create content consistently without the stress of the unpredictable, capricious YouTube algorithm. But you don't just remove my stress, you also give me the freedom to pursue videos that I know won't be a viral hit, but are important to publish anyway for the sake of religious literacy. So if you believe in our mission to boost religious literacy, and if you feel that we bring quality content about religion to this platform, please join our Patreon community at patreon.com/religionforbreakfast. We currently have 715 supporters, and my goal is to reach 1,000 supporters by the end of the year. Your support directly contributes to creating these videos and invests in the future of Religion for Breakfast. Click the link pinned in the comments below, and thank you everyone for believing in our mission and for your incredible continued support.